Part 1. The Arrow of Death. In Chapter 1, Nolyn, Nyphronian, and his squad are trapped in a box canyon within the urban forest, surrounded by enemy forces. After a scout returns with grim news, Nolyn accepts their likely fate and prepares to sacrifice himself to give his men a chance to escape. He orders the scout to report back for help, then hands over command to the first spear, Amicus, who is reluctant to lead. As the soldiers realize they are all facing certain death, Nolyn learns that Amicus Killian, known as the Arrow of Death, is among them, revealing the true identity of his comrade. In Chapter 2, Nolyn and his squadron are trapped in a jungle canyon fighting a horde of Gazel goblins. Despite the darkness, they struggle to light a fire and fortify their position. As night falls, Nolyn connects with his men, learning their backgrounds before the battle intensifies. Amicus Killian, the squadron leader, single-handedly holds off the gazelle with unmatched skill. As arrows rain down, Nolyn orders a counterattack, but the gazelle used dark magic, extinguishing the fire and causing a rock slide. In the chaos, Nolyn is separated from his men and left alone in the darkness, surrounded by death and silence. Part 2. The Monk. In Chapter 1, Sephryn is shopping in a bustling marketplace when her friend Arvis, a chaotic and often unreliable source of trouble, urgently pulls her away to a crime scene. They find a young man, Kendall, dead from a stab wound, and Sephryn soon confronts the murderer, Fhrey, a Fhrey noble who claims Kendall tried to steal from him. Despite Frill's arrogance and the tension with the crowd, Sephryn manages to de-escalate the situation. Later, Arvis dreams of seeking justice for Kendall's family, but Sephryn doubts any real change will come from it, reflecting on the limitations of the Imperial Council. In Chapter 2, Sephryn, struggling with the recent death of Kendall, reflects on her long life and her fears of growing callous or insane after centuries of fighting for change. She recalls the year 52, when she and her friends Nolyn and Bran had grand plans before Bran's death. While in an alley, Sephryn spots a man resembling Bran, but after pursuing him realizes it's not him. The man, Seymour Destin, reveals he follows Bran's teachings as a member of the Monks of Maribor. Sephryn is puzzled by his knowledge of Bran, whom she knew as a childhood friend. In Chapter 3, Sephryn is followed by a monk named Seymour who claims to be a follower of Bran, a figure from Sephryn's past. As they converse, Sephryn grows increasingly irritated by Seymour's persistent questions, especially regarding Bran and the religious beliefs surrounding him. Seymour reveals that he's searching for the second book of Bryn, a mysterious text, and has come to Percepliquis to start a church. After offering him a place to stay, Sephryn returns home to find the nursery in a horrific state, with blood everywhere and her child, Nurgia, missing. She is left in shock and fear. Part 3. The Gathering. In Chapter 1, Nolyn wakes up in the dense jungle of urban forest, feeling the effects of dehydration and exhaustion. He cautiously moves towards a river, hoping for water, but encounters an unseen presence in the undergrowth. After a tense standoff, he discovers it's Amicus, a fellow soldier. They briefly discuss their survival in the jungle, with Amicus explaining he fought off goblins the previous night. Nolyn reveals his complicated past, including his strained relationship with his father. They are joined by two other soldiers, Myth and Smirch, who share news of fallen comrades. The group reflects on their grim situation. In Chapter 2, Nolyn is reunited with Riley, Jarrell, and a wounded Kalinian after they find each other along the riverbank. The squadron members express relief and guilt over lost comrades, revealing that several men were killed in the dark during a battle with Gazelle. Despite the loss, Riley and Amicus explain their squadron's elite status, trained to fight in all conditions. Nolyn agrees to a brief burial for their fallen comrades, prioritizing survival and the need to move quickly. The group prepares to march out, aware that danger may still be lurking in the jungle. In Chapter 3, after the funeral, Nolyn leads the group to move out, distributing gear from fallen soldiers. They adapt to new methods of carrying equipment and begin a dangerous trek through the jungle. Smirch is reluctantly given the lead as the group navigates treacherous terrain. Nolyn and Amicus share a conversation about their fathers, revealing Amicus's complicated relationship with his soldier father, who discouraged joining the Legion. Nolyn relates, sharing his own strained connection with his father. The group presses forward, aware of the challenges ahead as they make their way downstream. Part 4. The Voice. In Chapter 1, Sephryn desperately tries to cover up a message the monk Seymour saw, fearing the danger it represents. After examining her neighborhood, she returns home to find no clues about her missing son, Nurgia, or who is behind the attack that killed Mika. As she cleans the nursery, Sephryn reflects on the deaths around her and her fear for her son. Suddenly, a disembodied voice speaks to her, threatening to harm Seymour and Nurgia unless Sephryn retrieves the horn of Gillandora from the palace. The voice demands obedience, leaving Sephryn with little choice but to comply. In Chapter 2, Sephryn approaches the Imperial Palace, where she reflects on the recent history and changes within its walls, including the controversial imprisonment of Bran, a popular teacher who defied the Emperor's version of history. After his release by the mystic Suri, a mysterious wall was built around the palace. Sephryn, now a key member of the Imperial Council, enters the palace under the pretense of looking for a lost scarf. As she moves deeper into the palace, driven by a voice urging her to find something valuable, she is confronted by Ilum just as she faces a critical decision. In Chapter 3, Sephryn meets Ilum, the Imperial Steward, who reminisces about his past with her father, Tekchen, and the Emperor. Ilum hints at his close relationship with the Emperor, but remains casual about his power. Sephryn, seeking an audience with the Emperor to present a request for historical memorabilia for the Founders' Day festival, learns that Ilum cannot directly help her, but suggests she submit a formal request. She also discovers that the Horn of Gillandora, a relic she hoped to display, is locked in the Emperor's private quarters. Afterward, Sephryn faces pressure from Andrul regarding a deal involving the Horn and her son. Part 5. One of them. In Chapter 1, Nolyn and his troops navigate through a jungle while discussing the concept of the One, a god Jor-El believes in. Jor-El shares how this god ordered him to join the Legion, leaving his wealthy life behind. They continue their journey toward Orlinius, where Nolyn contemplates his role as a potential emperor and his mother's influence on his beliefs. The group faces an ambush from Gazelle, and after a fierce battle, a Legion detachment arrives, led by Everett. Brak Barith, an old soldier, jokes about their situation, but Nolyn's troops assert they didn't need help. Part 6. Divine Providence. In Chapter 1, Mawandul, frustrated by the oppressive heat and constant insects of the jungle, watches as a group of battle-worn legionnaires, including a crossbreed, enters the city of Orlinius. Among them is the prince, whom Mawandul thought was dead. Annoyed by the setbacks in his plans, he uses magic to sabotage a chariot, drawing attention he didn't want. Reflecting on his long quest for revenge and his complicated relationship with his former mentor, the demon Trylos, Mawandul feels isolated but determined. He contemplates altering his approach to remain hidden while planning his next move. In Chapter 2, Mawandul confronts Legate Lynch after learning that Prince Nolyn, whom he believed dead, is alive. The two exchange sharp words, with Mawandul accusing Lynch of incompetence. Lynch, claiming divine intervention, denies responsibility for Nolyn's survival. Mawandul then reveals his true identity, suggesting he is a god, but Lynch dismisses him. Mawandul demonstrates his power by controlling the staff officer, Demetrius, forcing him to obey commands. Frustrated, Lynch tries to assert control, but Mawandul uses magic to explode Demetrius, proving his power and further unsettling the legate. Part 7. The Thief and the Poker. In Chapter 1, Sephryn confides in Seymour about her mission to retrieve a mysterious horn to save her son, Nurgia, from a kidnapper. She struggles with the overwhelming grief of losing him and must act quickly. Seymour suggests the voice in her head could be Gronbach, a mythical figure, but Sephryn dismisses the idea. She reveals that the horn may be tied to her father and the past, but she can't tell anyone the truth. Instead, she plans to recruit a thief and enlists Seymour's help as a scribe to research the horn at the palace's records office. In Chapter 2, Sephryn searches for Arvis Dyer at the West Market Square, where Arvis is accused of stealing a loaf of bread from a baker. Despite the evidence, Arvis insists she was promised the bread. Sephryn, who considers Arvis her only friend, reluctantly pays for it. Later, Sephryn seeks Arvis's help with a dangerous task, wanting to find a skilled thief. Arvis mentions a man named Errol, but insists Sephryn cannot go to him herself. She promises to arrange the meeting, warning Sephryn that the place is dangerous. Arvis leaves, joking that Sephryn will have to sleep with Errol to hire him. In Chapter 3, Sephryn waits anxiously in her dark, cold home, disturbed by the murder of Mika and the abduction of her son. Seymour returns after getting lost, discussing the chaotic state of the records office, but Sephryn is distracted by her growing frustration. She reveals her complex feelings about her parents and her past. The tension rises when a mysterious figure, Elan, enters. He claims to be a thief and reveals his knowledge of her son's disappearance, refusing to help unless paid. As Elan tries to leave, supernatural forces cause the door to jam and sharp objects attack him, signaling deeper dangers ahead. In Chapter 4, Sephryn recounts the events to Elan, explaining the situation without revealing too much to the voice, which may kill them if they make a mistake. Elan, a thief, explains the vault they need to open is gem-locked, requiring a specific key, a pendant worn by the Emperor. Sephryn remembers the pendant but struggles with how to obtain it. Elan suggests assassination as an option, but dismisses it when Sephryn rejects the idea. He agrees to take them to an expert the next day. The chapter ends with the group stuck in a tense situation, with the voice still watching. Part 8. Escape from Eurlinius. In Chapter 1, Nolyn and his group race through the streets of Eurlinius, avoiding alarms after the death of Legate Lynch. They reach the River's Key, where Nolyn contemplates his fugitive status. Despite his insistence that his actions make him unfit to lead, his men, including Amicus, Riley, Jarrell, Everett, and Merc, refuse to abandon him. They decide to stay together, even as Nolyn debates his next move. Nolyn decides not to kill the Pilatus Demetrius, but brings him along. They prepare to board a ship, hoping to escape the city and the consequences of their actions. In Chapter 2, Nolyn and his group board the Imperial warship *Striker*, choosing it partly for the emerald eyes painted on its prow. They set sail down the Este River, heading south. Nolyn reflects on his strained relationship with his father, the Emperor, and debates their next move. The crew acknowledges Nolyn's status as the prince, but Nolyn remains uncertain about his destination, with Percepliquis being a potential option. His men share memories of the city, and Nolyn recalls teachings from a mystic, Suri, about trusting intuition. Despite his doubts, Nolyn feels compelled to trust the voice guiding him. Part 9. Inside the Gem Fortress. In Chapter 1, Sephryn and Elan arrive at the impressive West Echo Precious Gems and Jewelry Creations, a towering structure known as the Gem Fortress. Elan, who claimed to know the jeweler Augustine Brinkle, reveals his detailed knowledge of Brinkle's punctual habits. They wait for Brinkle's arrival, with Elan showcasing his keen observational skills. When Brinkle arrives, he recognizes Sephryn as the daughter of Moya and Tection, surprising her. The two discuss Sephryn's mother's reputation and the Imperial Council, with Brinkle inviting Sephryn to join him for tea. Despite Elan's attempts to engage, she decides to go alone. In Chapter 2, Sephryn and Elan enter the Gem Fortress, which contrasts its imposing exterior with its delicate interior. Inside, they meet Ambassador Augustine, a dwarf who holds valuable knowledge about the past and gem locks. As they discuss Sephryn's parents and the history of the Belgriclangrayans, they reveal their need for his expertise to open a gem lock. Sephryn admits to hiring Elan to help steal a vital item, but insists it's for Imperial security. Augustine explains how gem locks function and suggests using a nullifying stone to confuse the lock, a method requiring knowledge of the gem family involved. Part 10. Death Pays a Visit. In Chapter 1, Arvis Dyer, living beneath the butcher shop of Charles Jenkins, grapples with her fragmented mind and uncertain past. She clings to the mystery of the bread, a secret she can barely remember but is convinced holds the key to her existence. As midnight strikes, Arvis hears footsteps approaching and assumes it's death. A cloaked figure appears, claiming to need her help, not her death. The figure reveals the connection to the bread and leads her to an alley where a child's cry emanates from beneath a sewer grate, leaving Arvis with a new mystery to solve alone. In Chapter 2, Arvis descends into the sewer after hearing the cries of a child coming from below a grate. Struggling with fear and her failing mind, she manages to move the heavy stone and climbs into the dark, stinking passage. Armed only with a torch, she navigates the foul maze, led by the cries. Despite her efforts, the cries stop as she reaches a four-way intersection, leaving her in a moment of silence and despair. Arvis, overwhelmed by failure and the loss of the child, begins to sob, her grief compounded by her fragmented memories. Part 11. The Orenfar. In Chapter 1, Nolyn, recovering from seasickness aboard the Imperial warship Striker, reflects on his long struggle with the condition. His companion, Amicus Killian, offers him beer instead of water, and they discuss their pasts. Nolyn shares memories of his mother's courage and the ancient figure Roan of Ren, debunking myths about her inventions. The conversation turns to Nolyn's strained relationship with Sephryn, the director of the Imperial Council. Nolyn reveals they fought over his refusal to convince his father, the Emperor, to listen to the Council's suggestions, deepening his sense of guilt and fear of his father. In Chapter 2, the crew of the Imperial warship *Striker* struggles with dangerous landings, facing potential ambushes as they approach unfamiliar shores. Amicus volunteers to lead a dangerous swim to shore, along with his men, leaving their armor behind. As they arrive, Nolyn watches enviously, reflecting on the carefree bravery of his companions. After securing the beach, the group gathers around a fire, and Amicus reveals details about his unique combat training, known as the Tesh, which includes family secrets involving runes that protect against magic. This sparks discussions on ancient weapons and mysterious markings linked to magic. Part 12. Crossroads. In Chapter 1, Sephryn fills a broken jug with water at the fountain and is approached by Adela, who inquires about Mika's condition. Sephryn is cautious, knowing the gossip-prone nature of the community, and responds ambiguously. She reflects on her isolation and the importance of Seymour's safety, having sent him to the disorganized Imperial Hall of Records to keep him occupied and protected. After Sephryn returns home, Arvis arrives with alarming news. Seymour, the man she cares for, may be dead, found injured at the corner of Grand Mar and Ebonydale. Sephryn rushes to find him. In Chapter 2, Sephryn rushes to find Seymour, who was reportedly stabbed by thieves. Arvis, who witnessed the attack, describes how the assailants tried to rob Seymour but were unsuccessful. Upon arriving at the scene, Sephryn finds no body and questions witnesses, including a mercer, who confirms seeing a man on the ground but did not help. To Sephryn's relief, Seymour reappears, unharmed but shaken. He explains he avoided the robbers and only fell, hitting his head. Later, Arvis confides in Sephryn, claiming she saw Seymour die, and expresses her growing fear of death. Sephryn reassures her. In Chapter 3, Seymour uses Orenfar runes, symbols that block magic, to protect himself and Sephryn from the Voice. Sephryn realizes the symbols could keep them safe, explaining how the Voice can't hear her inside the palace walls. Seymour shares a discovery: the Horn of Gilindora, a Fhrey relic that allows one of Fhrey blood to challenge for leadership. However, the horn cannot be used until after the death of the current ruler. Despite this, Sephryn acknowledges the Voice may still try to use the horn for power. She asks Seymour to mark himself with the runes for safety while keeping their plan intact. Part 13. Vernese. In Chapter 1, the crew of the Imperial warship Striker approaches the port of Vernes, marking the end of their journey. Nolyn and his men from the 7th Sikau discuss their next steps as deserters from the 7th Legion. Nolyn reveals his uncertainty about the attempt on his life, speculating that it could be linked to someone with a grudge, perhaps even an Erevan artist. The group debates their future, with Nolyn suggesting they go inland and disappear to avoid being caught for Lynch's death. They agree they must stay low, especially once they reach Vernese. In Chapter 2, the Striker docks at Vernes, where the crew encounters an angry crowd mistaking them for reinforcements for a new governor. Urban Prefect Tali explains that the city is in revolt, fearing the new governor's orders. Nolyn learns from Demetrius that his father, Emperor Nyphron, ordered his death, confirming Nolyn's long-held suspicions. Nolyn decides to act, planning to use the city's unrest to overthrow his father. He aims to gain support from the 2nd Legion and the rebellious civilians to seize Percepliquis. His men, including Amicus, are skeptical but agree to follow him. In Chapter 3, Nolyn and his squad disembark at Vernes Wharf to find a growing, angry mob. The city guard, led by Prefect Tali, is struggling to maintain order. Nolyn reveals to the crowd that he is the Emperor's son, but not there as a representative of his father. He condemns the Emperor's unjust rule, highlighting the mistreatment of humans by the Fhrey elite. Nolyn declares that he will lead, not join, the revolt, offering a vision of equality and justice. He convinces the crowd to rally behind him, preparing them to challenge the Emperor's tyranny. In Chapter 4, Nolyn and his group, including Amicus, gather at the Sea Serpent Tavern to plan their next move. They expect a response from the Second Legion and discuss the lack of a formal rebellion plan. Their conversation is interrupted when a Primus and his men from the Second Legion arrive, questioning Nolyn's identity. After a tense confrontation, Nolyn reveals he is the Emperor's son and holds rank over the Primus. He uses his position to persuade the soldiers to consider joining his cause, offering fair treatment in contrast to the Emperor's oppressive rule. The Primus agrees to support Nolyn despite the challenges ahead. In Chapter 5, Nolyn and Amicus meet with Legate Farnell, a seasoned military leader, to discuss their rebellion. Farnell reveals the political unrest in Vernes caused by the death of the governor and the harsh policies of the Emperor's new appointee, Adverin Wynn. He also shares that soldiers have been hearing mysterious voices, believed to be divine, calling for a hero to challenge the Emperor. Farnell is caught between loyalty to the Emperor and the potential of supporting Nolyn's revolution. Ultimately, Farnell sees Nolyn as the hero foretold by the voices and decides to back him, embracing the revolution. Part 14. A Gem of Great Worth. In Chapter 1, Sephryn and Errol assist Augustine in preparing a lavish emerald egg for the Emperor. The egg is a delicate and expensive piece of art, but its impracticality makes it a costly, albeit useless, gift. Augustine is reluctant to make it an official gift due to potential complications. The conversation shifts when Sephryn asks about another gem, an uncut ruby, which is intended to open the Emperor's safe. Augustine insists on seeing Sephryn wield her mother's legendary bow in exchange for completing the task. Sephryn reluctantly agrees to demonstrate her skills to fulfill Augustine's request. In Chapter 2, Sephryn and Errol part ways after discussing their mission. Sephryn reflects on the challenges ahead and the risky plan involving Nergia. She avoids familiar faces on her way home and passes by Eagleton's Red Chariots, a prominent feed merchant and sponsor of a major racing team. This triggers memories of a past visit to the Grand Circus with Nolyn nearly 800 years ago when they shared a blanket and watched a race together. As she stands before the Red Chariot sign, Sephryn is reminded of her responsibility, fearing failure will prevent Nolyn from meeting his son. In Chapter 3, Emperor Nyphron prepares for the arrival of Sicker, the governor of Meridid. Though they meet annually, Nyphron finds Sicker tedious and lacking the personality of his former warriors. The conversation shifts to the state of Meridid, which is thriving under Seeker's leadership. When Sicker mentions Techion's arrival, Nyphron reflects on their complicated history. The Belgric Langrean ambassador, Augustin Brinkle, arrives with a bejeweled emerald egg as a gift, which Nyphron dismisses as impractical. Despite its lack of obvious value, Nyphron recognizes its importance to Brinkle, though he remains unimpressed with the gift. In Chapter 4, Sephryn and Seymour return home to find Errol by the fireplace. Errol shares that the ambassador delivered the egg without issue, but its location remains unknown. Sephryn plans a heist for the following day, to enter the palace, hide in the records hall, and retrieve the egg by midnight. Errol is reluctant but agrees to assist with unlocking doors, while Seymour insists on accompanying them, though Sephryn doubts his need. The group discusses the plan, and as they prepare, Seymour struggles to start the fire, and Errol nonchalantly mentions the missing fireplace poker. Part 15. Teshlor Knights. In Chapter 1, Amicus Killian trains soldiers aboard the Imperial warship Striker as they ascend the Urim River, preparing to secure it for the Second Legion. During combat demonstrations, Amicus highlights the importance of surprise and balance in fighting techniques. He demonstrates with Jarell de Martefeld, who defeats a Second Legionnaire with unexpected movements. Amicus explains the Tesh fighting style, a centuries-old method developed to combat the Fhrey, and clarifies that it is practiced by a select few. As the warship nears the hills of Renid, Nolyn reflects on the urgency of their mission, unsure of how much time remains. In Chapter 2, Nolyn arrives in Percepliquis, greeted by Farnell and Legate Helanus, who have joined forces with him. Helanus explains that Nolyn is a symbol rallying support due to his mixed bloodline and Legion experience. As the Legions prepare to march at dawn, Nolyn reflects on his strained relationship with his father, Emperor Nyphron, and the mystery behind his survival. Later, Nolyn discusses the future of the Empire with Jarell de Martefeld, who advocates for a code of conduct for their Legion to prevent corruption. Jarell's idealism leads him to suggest they become incorruptible knight heroes, enforcers of justice. Part 16. Hail, Primus. In Chapter 1, Mawandul reflects on his past while suffering from seasickness near the riverbank. He recalls the pain of losing his lover, Macaretta, and his throne to Nyphron, events that have shaped his current path. As night falls, Mawandul uses a magical connection to check on Sephryn, hoping she is close to obtaining a crucial item for his plans. He is surprised to find her in the palace, a place he cannot see her. Mawandul contemplates his next moves for revenge, acknowledging that Nolyn's survival has inadvertently helped his cause. He begins to prepare for the next stage of his plan. In Chapter 2, Nolyn, preparing to confront his father, struggles with his helmet and reflects on the uncertain future. Demetrius advises against meeting with his powerful father, warning that it could lead to his death. Nolyn argues that talking to his father is necessary to prevent bloodshed and change the law. He plans to convince his father to cease his harmful attitude, though Demetrius doubts success. Nolyn suggests Demetrius accompany him to testify about his father's previous attempt on his life. They agree that if diplomacy fails, they must be prepared to fight despite the risks involved. In Chapter 3, Nolyn prepares to face his father alone, seeking a peaceful resolution to avoid war. He discusses his plans with Amycus and his men, explaining that he believes his father's actions don't fully add up and that there may still be a chance to avoid bloodshed. Despite Amycus's concerns, Nolyn is determined to go through with the meeting, with the risk of being killed if it fails. His men express their respect and offer support, though Nolyn insists on facing his father without help. He heads out, leaving his companions behind with a sense of hope for the future. Part 17. Cries in the Dark. In Chapter 1, Arvis is awakened by the midnight bell on Founder's Day and reflects on her restless sleep. She hears the cry of a baby and follows it into the sewers, where she finds an abandoned infant. After navigating the dark, treacherous tunnels and fighting off rats, she rescues the child, calming it in her arms. As she holds the baby, memories flood back, and she realizes she had a child of her own. This moment marks a significant turning point as Arvis's past begins to resurface amidst the dire circumstances. In Chapter 2, Arvis holds the baby, experiencing a rare moment of peace and joy. However, time slips away as she navigates the sewer seeking an escape route. She encounters dead bodies, rats, and disturbing noises before meeting an old woman, Mika de Bruce, who accuses Arvis of stealing the baby. Arvis defends herself, revealing memories of her past and the sacrifice she made for her child. Mika claims the child is Sephryn's and warns of the coming children of Uberlin. As the woman approaches, Arvis is struck by a knife, setting the stage for a dangerous confrontation. Part 18. 6 Toes In. In Chapter 1, Sephryn, Errol, and Seymour are in the records hall preparing for an event that will take place at midnight on Founder's Day. While Seymour stays near the door, the others search through ancient records. Errol, disinterested in the texts, mocks Seymour, while Sephryn reflects on her son, Nergia, and her recent realization about the Miralith, not a god. The group discusses the significance of the records and the risks involved in their mission. As the midnight bell tolls, Sephryn reminds Seymour to stay behind and vanish if things go wrong, thanking him for his help. In Chapter 2, Sephryn and Errol approach the Emperor's palace, where a lone guard lazily wanders the grounds. As they reach the front door, Errol is struck by it, and a young wash-girl named Opella accosts them. Sephryn smoothly introduces Errol as Matthias Hager, explaining he's doing work for her. Opella is initially confused, but is reassured when Sephryn mentions a scarf. After some brief conversation, Errol pretends to be injured from the door and convinces Opella to fetch him water. Sephryn then urges Errol to hurry, reminding him to not forget Bartholomew. In Chapter 3, Sephryn stealthily navigates the Emperor's palace, heart racing as she prepares to steal a horn. Though she's never committed theft, she's willing to risk it to save her child, Nergia. She silently approaches a gem-locked vault, frustrated by its resistance, but eventually it opens. Inside, she finds various items, including the horn. As she takes it and hides it in her bag, she hears footsteps approaching. Panicking, she hides, and the sound of a knock on the door fills her with dread. The voice outside reveals the Emperor is not in his chambers, but his son, Nolyn, has arrived. In Chapter 4, Sephryn returns to find Errol relaxed in the entrance hall while Opella is absent. They quickly head for the records room where Seymour waits. Sephryn hands over Mika's bag, confirming she got the horn. She reveals her plan to demand Nergia's return and confront the voice, suspecting he is a Fhrey Muralith plotting to use the horn for power. She instructs Seymour to keep the horn, and if she doesn't return by sunset, deliver it to the Emperor, blaming her for the theft. Sephryn thanks both Seymour and Errol for their help, offering a hug to Errol in return. In Chapter 5, Sephryn and Errol leave the records room and head to the gate, where they encounter two men waiting outside the palace. One is armored, and the other wears robes, prompting Sephryn to wonder if they arrived with Nolyn, who is seeking an audience with Nyphron. Sephryn reflects on the timing of Nolyn's arrival, suspecting it's not a coincidence given her own actions. She contemplates going back to the palace, but hesitates. As she walks away, she realizes her purse is missing, adding to the chaos of the night. Part 19. Father and Son. In Chapter 1, Nolyn arrives at the palace, reflecting on his complex relationship with his father, Emperor Nyphron. He recalls stories of a mysterious figure named Malcolm, whom he believes may be present during this crucial meeting. When Nyphron enters, Nolyn is surprised by his father's more casual demeanor, contrasting with his distant image from childhood. The two engage in intense conversation about Nolyn's actions, including the army he controls. Nolyn accuses his father of plotting to have him killed, but Nyphron dismisses it, revealing he's already anticipated Nolyn's rebellion, outmaneuvering him with ease. In Chapter 2, Sephryn walks through the empty streets, reflecting on the eerie atmosphere surrounding the Imperial Masquerade Emporium. She anxiously waits for a response from the voice, having stolen the horn as requested, but hears only unsettling clicking noises. When she investigates, she spots movement in an alley, but before she can act, the voice contacts her. It demands another task: kill Emperor Nyphron. Sephryn protests, having already completed her part of the deal, but the voice insists. Despite its strange, more polite tone, Sephryn agrees, knowing she can't back out now if she wants to see her son alive. In Chapter 3, Nolyn reflects on his strained relationship with his father, Emperor Nyphron. They discuss past events, including Nolyn's tumultuous upbringing, the wars he fought, and his assignment to a salt mine, which Nyphron defends as a strategic move. As the conversation grows tense, Nolyn expresses anger over his father's actions, particularly how Nyphron manipulated him into dangerous situations. Despite Nyphron's attempts to justify his actions, Nolyn remains distrustful, questioning whether his father plans to execute him for treason, or if they will face off in combat. The chapter ends with an ominous uncertainty about their future. Part 20. Children of Legends. In Chapter 1, Sephryn struggles with the overwhelming idea of assassinating Emperor Nyphron. She repeats to herself that she cannot kill him, despite the pressure from the voice and her fear of the consequences. The thought consumes her as she reflects on her legacy, the possibility of changing the balance of power, and her mother's role in the fight for peace between humans and Fhrey. As she battles with her thoughts and exhaustion, the cries of a baby disturb her, adding to her anxiety. Eventually, Sephryn realizes that by killing Nyphron, she might fulfill her mother's unfinished work, bringing true peace. In Chapter 2, Nyphron opens up to Nolyn about his difficult relationship with his father Sephryn, and how the hardship shaped him into a respected leader. Despite the mistreatment, Nyphron reveals that the suffering made him stronger and earned him respect. Nolyn challenges his father's beliefs, criticizing the Fhrey-dominated empire where humans hold no real power. Nyphron defends his views, claiming that Phrey's longevity and experience make them better suited to leadership, while humans are too short-lived and emotionally driven. Nolyn counters, arguing that the Phrey see themselves as superior, and humans deserve a voice in their governance. In Chapter 3, Sephryn reflects on her strained relationship with her mother, Moya, recalling a painful archery lesson from her youth. Moya's harshness and belittling behavior shaped Sephryn's resentment, but a rare moment of success in hitting a distant acorn made her realize her skill. Now, centuries later, Sephryn faces the legacy of her mother's cruelty, as well as the memory of Moya's final years marked by bitterness and drinking. After inheriting her mother's bow, Sephryn seeks out the old arrows, preparing for a dangerous mission: to assassinate the Emperor. In Chapter 4, Nolyn faces his father, Emperor Nyphron, and contemplates killing him to seize the throne. Despite the tension, Nyphron discourages violence, emphasizing the consequences of killing a Fhrey and suggesting that Nolyn's mother, Persephone, would not approve of such actions. Nolyn grapples with the conflicting desires to end his father's reign and to avoid the consequences of patricide. Nyphron's words reveal that Nolyn's compassion, inherited from his mother, makes him reluctant to follow through with the act. The confrontation ends with Nolyn unable to kill his father, reflecting on his complex heritage and the path ahead. Part 21, A Cup of Wine. In Chapter 1, Amicus Killian returns to Percepliquis after 8 years, reflecting on his past victories and the betrayal that led to his escape. He and his group are preparing for war, but they find the legions unprepared and disorganized, with their leader, Helanus, still asleep at dawn. Amicus senses something is wrong and confronts Helanus, who seems uninterested in attacking. As tensions rise, Amicus realizes they are outnumbered and in a disadvantageous position. Despite the overwhelming odds, he and his men retreat toward the city, knowing their cause is lost but resigned to their fate. In Chapter 2, Nolyn returns to the palace, relieved that the Emperor is still alive after a conversation that clears up misunderstandings. He walks through the plaza with Geralt and Demetrius, discussing plans for reform and his growing understanding of his father's flaws. When Demetrius expresses disappointment over Nolyn not killing the Emperor, Nolyn learns that Demetrius had planned to eliminate the Emperor's line and take the throne for himself. As Nolyn becomes confused about Demetrius's true identity, he hears the sound of approaching gazelle, realizing that danger is imminent. Demetrius has unleashed them, revealing his betrayal. In Chapter 3, Amicus and his men prepare for battle against 50 legionnaires. However, as the soldiers charge, they unexpectedly slam into an invisible barrier, collapsing one by one. Amicus and his group are initially confused, but they soon realize the barrier is sorcery. As soldiers try to find a way around, first Primus Jerub-Tanator accuses Amicus of causing it, but he denies any involvement. Tension rises as a high-speed whine is heard from the city, signaling the approach of Gazelle. Amicus realizes that the invisible barrier might not be the only threat they face. In Chapter 4, Nolyn and Geralt struggle to draw their swords, realizing they are magically trapped by Demetrius, who reveals he's not truly Demetrius, but a wielder of magic. He explains that the Blind Ones, who have mastered the art, are behind the city's seal and the growing darkness in the sky. Demetrius, now transformed into a Bahran gazelle, reveals that the city is sealed, trapping everyone inside to die, including the Rune, Fhrey, and Durg. As Gazel begin to enter the square, Nolyn and Geralt are left powerless and surrounded. In Chapter 5, Nyphron is informed by Plimmerath that the city is under attack by Gazelle emerging from the sewers, wells, and bathhouses. Despite the absurdity of the idea, Nyphron learns that an invisible barrier is preventing the legions from entering the city. The city guard is losing ground to the Gazelle, and they are closing in on the palace. Nyphron decides to act, ordering his armor and the Instaria to arms. He plans to break the ring of Oberdaza in the Imperial Arena to turn the tide, confident it will be a victorious Founders' Day. Part 22, Founders' Day. In Chapter 1, Sephryn sneaks through backstreets to avoid detection while carrying a bundle of arrows and her mother's bow, Audrey. She recalls her mother's legendary past, including using the 4 arrows, which Sephryn now intends to use to assassinate the Emperor. As she climbs to her secret hiding spot on the roof of the temple, she contemplates the consequences of her actions, feeling the weight of her task. Sephryn struggles to string the bow, but eventually succeeds. Watching the Emperor prepare for the Founders' Day celebrations, she prepares to take her shot, despite the emotional and moral turmoil. In Chapter 2, Nyphron dons his old armor, reflecting on how much things have changed. He leads a group of young, inexperienced Instaria warriors, many of whom lack the skills and discipline of their ancestors. As they prepare for battle, Nyphron is reminded of the decadence and softness that has overtaken his people. The sound of the approaching gazelle fills the air, and Nyphron acknowledges their dangerous capabilities. Despite his doubts, Nyphron feels a surge of pride when he spots his son Nolyn running toward him with a sword, offering hope that there might still be strength in their line. In Chapter 3, Sephryn prepares to kill Nyphron, struggling with her nerves and the gravity of the act. She waits for him to move near the fountain, but is distracted when she sees Nolyn run to his father. Nyphron orders an attack on the gazelle, and father and son lead the charge into battle. As Nyphron fights, he's startled when Nolyn attempts to stab him in the back. Realizing the truth, Nyphron strikes Nolyn down and recognizes the presence of the Mirlith, Mawndul, who is revealed as the true mastermind behind the betrayal. Nyphron vows to correct his past mistake. In Chapter 4, Sephryn watches Nyphron and Nolyn battle a massive goblin horde in the city square. Confused by the sudden attack and the lack of warnings, she questions the strange events unfolding around her, including her son's death and the Voice's demands. She realizes everything is part of a larger plan, but she's determined not to kill anyone. As Nyphron and the Instaria fight valiantly, Nolyn is struck by his father, revealing the deep betrayal. In the chaos, Sephryn instinctively releases an arrow aimed at Nyphron, unaware of the moment until it's too late. Part 23, Merilith. In Chapter 1, Nolyn and Jarell flee to the docks as the city is overrun by Gazelle. Nolyn suspects magic is involved and wonders if Demetrius is a goblin warlord or a powerful enemy. Trapped by a line of Gazelle warriors and unable to draw their weapons due to an enchantment, Nolyn and Jarell brace for death. As Gazelle close in, Nolyn hears Amika's call out, leading the Teshlors into the fray. After an intense battle, Nolyn and his group gain the upper hand, but they realize the Gazelle may have been invited by Mawndul, a dangerous enemy with a personal vendetta against Nolyn. In Chapter 2, Sephryn shoots and kills Emperor Nyphron, inadvertently sealing her soul's fate by violating Farrell's law. She rushes to Nolyn's side, only to realize he's not himself. The voice in her head reveals that Nolyn's death was orchestrated and the Emperor's demise was part of a larger plan. The Fhrey demands the horn Sephryn hid, knowing that its power will allow him to ascend to the throne. Despite her pleas to find her son, Sephryn learns he's likely dead, killed as part of a scheme to eliminate the Nyphronian bloodline. Part 24. The Horn. In Chapter 1, Mawndul, on a mission to acquire the horn, enters the palace ground aware of the dangers posed by its rune-covered walls, which strip him of his power. He navigates the area, recalling a conversation about a records office and a monk named Seymour. Mawndul hesitates, unsure if Seymour is truly a threat or a simple monk, but resolves to proceed. He contemplates his past and his quest for revenge, realizing that by blowing the horn, he can regain power and exact his vengeance. Determined, he steps into the dark staircase leading to his goal. In Chapter 2, Mawndul confronts the monk Seymour, demanding the horn, but discovers it's a fake. Seymour reveals he's not Turin, but Trilos, who manipulated events from the shadows. Trilos explains that Turin may not be able to predict his actions, only the consequences, and that the real horn is still out of reach. Mawndul is frustrated, but learns that Nyphron and his heirs are likely dead, leaving an opening for a power struggle. Trilos suggests the impending chaos could work in their favor, but Mawndul remains focused on his goal, to find the real horn and secure his power. Part 25. The Invisible Hand Moves. In Chapter 1, Sephryn mourns Nyphron's death, feeling guilt over her actions and the loss of her soul. A mysterious man who Sephryn recognizes from the market reveals that Seymour is dead and that the Merilith who manipulated her into killing Nyphron was using Seymour's body. The man comforts Sephryn, assuring her that her actions weren't entirely her fault. He then tells her that Nolyn is alive and in danger at the Grand Arch, urging her to act quickly to save him. He asks Sephryn to vow never to reveal her role in Nyphron's death and to fulfill a second request for redemption. In Chapter 2, Sephryn races through the city, avoiding chaos and bodies left in the wake of the attack. She encounters a group of women and children unaware of the danger as Gazelle goblins approach them. Sephryn, with quick reflexes, uses her arrows to kill 2 Gazelle and injures a third. She orders the women and children to find shelter before retrieving her arrows and continuing her mission. As she races on, her mind focuses on the urgency of saving Nolyn, who is still in danger. The city is in turmoil, and Sephryn's actions are critical to her mission. In Chapter 3, Nolyn, Amicus, and the Teshlors face a tense standoff with a group of Gazelles while the First Legion watches behind an invisible barrier. Amicus takes charge, rallying the Teshlors to confront the Gazel offensively. With swift, coordinated strikes, Amicus, Riley, Myth, Nolyn, and Jarell quickly eliminate several enemies, reducing the odds. The Gazelle retreat, but soon a new wave surges from the city. The Teshlors, along with Nolyn, brace themselves in a defensive formation as the ground trembles from the approaching horde. Spectators marvel at the Teshlors' courage, but the battle has only just begun. In Chapter 4, Sephryn navigates through the empty Merchelin garden to the Imperial arena, where she finds an elevated position overlooking 6 Gazel chanting and casting spells below. Reflecting on her mother Moya's legendary archery skills, she readies herself to take down the Gazel in one swift attack, aware of the danger if even one survives. Calming her breath, she channels her focus, recalling her mother's lessons and Suri's wisdom. Sephryn fires her arrows in rapid succession, nearly synchronizing their impacts to avoid alerting the gazelle, successfully eliminating them and securing a chance to aid Nolyn. In Chapter 5, Nolyn and the Teshlors, drenched in Gazel blood, face overwhelming odds as the Horde relentlessly crashes against their defenses. Despite their exhaustion, the Teshlors' skill enables them to hold the line, and their intense combat reflexes keep them alive, though barely. As the Gazelle pause to clear their fallen, the group realizes that the magical barrier isolating them might only hold back those without the Orenfar tattoos, potentially allowing them an escape. Suddenly, amid the battle's chaos, the barrier drops and the legions flood in, bringing Nolyn and the others a desperately needed reinforcement. Part 26. Telling the Truth. In Chapter 1, Sephryn confirms all the Oberdaza are dead and retrieves her arrows. As she heads through the streets, she encounters legionnaires, but no one can confirm if Nolyn is alive. She proceeds, thinking he's likely dead, only to find him alive at Imperial Plaza, where they joyfully reunite. Nolyn mourns his father, realizing the Emperor may have acted out of care rather than malice. Sephryn, burdened by a secret, is interrupted when Arvis arrives with her son, Nergia. Sephryn introduces Nergia to Nolyn, presenting him as his son, concealing the truth she was about to reveal. Part 27. The Last Galantian. In Chapter 1, Nyphron's death during the defense against the Gazel invasion is marked as an omen, and his heroism is honored with a 3-day vigil. Nolyn, now set to become emperor, is reluctantly dressed for his coronation by his loyal Teshlors, grappling with his new responsibilities as ruler, husband, and father. Despite his insecurities, he announces his plan for the Teshlors to protect the Empire, uphold justice, and defend the people. Amicus and the others agree to support his vision, uniting to forge an elite force dedicated to safeguarding peace and nobility in the Empire under Nolyn's leadership. In Chapter 2, Sephryn contemplates her future as Empress, feeling both the weight of history in Empress Persephone's former chamber and the comfort of her son, Nerga. Despite her joy at his return, she struggles with Mika's betrayal and questions her motives, wondering if Mika too believed she acted for a greater good. The city celebrates Sephryn as a hero, but her inner turmoil clouds the festivities. Reflecting on the promise of a long, meaningful life with Nolyn and Nerga, Sephryn sees a chance to leave a legacy, though she regrets never being able to reconcile with her past. In Chapter 3, Sephryn prepares for her wedding and coronation, which will mark a new era uniting humans and Fhrey. Her father, Tekchen, arrives, sharing tales of meeting a mysterious man named Malcolm, whose appearance foreshadows significant events. Tekchen's arrival brings Sephryn a sense of family and comfort, though she struggles with grief for friends lost in recent battles. Tekchen learns that a Miralith named Mawendul was responsible for an attack on the city and that Sephryn had to retrieve a powerful artifact, the Horn of Gilendora, to rescue her kidnapped son, Nergia. In Chapter 4, Tekchen reveals to Sephryn the significance of the Horn of Gilendora, explaining that it signifies who holds power among the Fhrey and could trigger a new war if its use becomes known. Although Sephryn had given Mawendul a fake horn, Tekchen warns that if the real horn is used, the Erevan Fhrey will realize Nyphron's death and potentially rebel. Sephryn is advised to keep this secret from Nolyn, who would risk himself to fulfill his duty. Just as Sephryn ponders this, the bell rings, signaling the start of her wedding and coronation ceremony. Part 28. Finding the Way Home. In Chapter 1, Nolyn's coronation as emperor and his marriage ceremony conclude, marking a pivotal shift in his life. As he reflects on the responsibilities and sacrifices ahead, he recalls his mother's wisdom about taking risks. The crowd celebrates the new emperor, and Nolyn finds reassurance in his bride, Sephryn. At the palace gates, they're greeted by influential figures, including a Belgric Lungraean ambassador who praises Sephryn's archery skills. As they retreat from the celebrations, Sephryn wonders why her father isn't present, and Nolyn suggests he may be engaged with old Teshlar friends. The two then escape to rest. In Chapter 2, Nolyn and Sephryn, newly married, find themselves uneasy in the imposing imperial residence and decide to escape into the city. As they wander through Ebonydale, Sephryn reflects on her memories of a kind man named Seymour, whose memory Nolyn promises to honor with a pillar. The couple then encounters a young girl, Alina, who has been orphaned and hiding after recent attacks. Recognizing her as a long-lost child that a friend has been desperately searching for, Sephryn realizes the significance of this encounter as a miraculous reunion, hinting at mysterious forces guiding their paths.